Hello, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Vance Hilderman from Fusion. It's a pleasure today to be having our next broadcast webinar. This webinar is a 1-hour technical tutorial with my colleague, Aaron David, who I'll introduce in just a moment. This webinar is about aviation cybersecurity regulation. It's a 1-hour technical tutorial from Fusion. Aaron, can you hear me okay?
I can hear loud and clear, Vance. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. That means our security systems are working, folks. Let's continue with that in mind. So our agenda for this 1 hour is to first introduce the info security aspect of cybersecurity from Fusion and InfoSec, Aaron David. We're going to talk about cybersecurity and the new top-level guidance ecosystem, starting with document 326 or European document 202, but there's more. We're going to discuss airworthiness security process. This process is mandatory, and we'll explain what mandatory is as it's applicable this year and even more beyond. We're going to talk about security assurance basics, then the post-development phase, what it takes to develop aviation software, what it takes to deploy, what we have to be aware of. Then we'll have our conclusion. It'll take about 45 to 50 minutes, so we should have time for Q&A. So ponder your questions. You can post those as usual, and we'll have a few minutes. Again, if we don't have time for all your questions, and we will do our best, we will do our best afterwards to respond to you via email and answer those questions for you. Okay? Now, first, let me introduce my colleague, Aaron David. He's a very well-educated gentleman. He's a member of WG72, which is EuroK, and RTCA, the publishing groups for our guideline ecosystem. He's a former commander of the IAF's Avionics and Control Software Center, also the former head of IMA, the Missile Defense Organization's System Engineering Interoperability Department, and Civil Aviation Administration of Israel advisor for UAS avionics software, and his contact information is right there below. But now I'd like to turn it over to Aaron David, who will walk us through an introduction, 1 hour, of the aviation cybersecurity ecosystem. Aaron, would you like to go?
Yes, Vance, thank you very much for presenting me, and we'll go directly down to business. Just a second. Here we go. Okay. Aviation cybersecurity, we'll introduce it very short, just to proceed with the real 326.202 set. First of all, let's let's take a real quick historic look at how on earth did we get to where we are today. It all started in the early 70s with the first computer virus conceived by some computer enthusiasts and academics. Just as a theoretic example, a decade later, it already became malware using attack vectors. In 1988, Mr. Morris of the United States was honored to be the first person tried and convicted, as it became a crime to attack computers. Then in the 90s, we were exposed to more sophisticated forms of attack, like the Michelangelo March 6th birthday, where each year on March 6th, this time bomb detonated and destroyed the first sectors of a hard drive or a floppy disk of the unfortunate computer that was infected by it. The turn of the century saw the first massive love letter email scam with billions of dollars in damages already. That was already not a laughing matter. Then we got malware packages, and then those malware packages were used for massive attacks on such companies as Google and Symantec and others. 2010 saw the Stuxnet with the first cyber physical system sustaining substantial damage. That was not just IT, generic IT information getting lost or corrupted. 2013 brought us the CryptoLocker, the first ransomware massive global attack. And then in recent years, it started getting to our business, to aviation, where airports were attacked in Vietnam, Ukraine, and other places. And as recently as 2017, the famous WannaCry ransomware attack included some civil aviation prominent victims, such as Boeing, LATAM, Latin American airline groups, and more. During these recent years, we have seen this. This event took place on April 2015, and why did I title this Good News? For two reasons. Reason number one is that this nice gentleman, Mr. Chris Roberts, whom I had the pleasure of meeting in person a few months ago, is actually a white hat hacker, and he's tweaking with 737 network server to tweak some different messages than intended, was his way of exposing vulnerabilities in order for authorities to fix them. So no harm done at real time. Of course, as you can understand, Mr. Roberts doesn't fly a lot today. The second reason, and more importantly, is that this incident was one of a chain of events that lit a firecracker under the regulators' behinds. So cybersecurity regulation for aviation got into double speed. Let's first look at what is actually aviation security and airworthiness security as per the standards themselves, the 326 and 202. The purpose of security, not necessarily cybersecurity, is ensuring the safety of flight, first and foremost, and maintaining operation of civil aviation infrastructure without disruption, at this order, of course. Airworthiness security, and here we are talking about specifically cyber security, is the protection of the airworthiness of an aircraft from intentional unauthorized electronic interaction. Say what? Say this. Intentional unauthorized electronic interaction, short IUEI, and here I will be extremely specific, quoting exactly the 326.202 definitions, is a circumstance or event with a potential to affect the aircraft due to human action resulting from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, denial, disruption, modification, or destruction of information and or aircraft system interfaces. Okay, this includes The consequences of malware and forged data and the effects of external systems. I'll repeat that. Consequences of malware and forged data. This means that the author of a virus, worm, Trojan, any type of malware, even if they don't even know what aviation is, and their piece of malware gets inadvertently into an airborne system of some sort, would be part of an attack, even if they don't even know about it. And this would have interesting consequences trying to apply the 326.202. This does not include, however, physical attacks or electromagnetic disturbance on information systems, etc., unless it results in one of these consequences: access, use, disclosure of information, aircraft system interfaces, etc. Okay, we've talked enough around the set. Now, what is the set? Before diving inside, we should realize that this 326.202 set was not born out of the blue, and it is very deeply connected to other industry standards, mainly in three areas. The first one is all-in-one info security sets, such as common criteria, also known as ISO 15408, the ISO 27000 family of standards, maybe the most popular, arguably the most popular family of IT, generic IT cybersecurity standards. And the American NIST special publication 800 series that includes way over 100 documents of every aspect of cybersecurity and serves as a baseline of many of these standards themselves. The second type of connected standards to the 326.202 is the Operational Technology Cyber-Physical System Security Standards. Unlike the generic IT InfoSec of the first type, most of them derive from NIST special publication 800-82, currently at revision 2. And the international version of it is ISA IEC 62443, still in work. Some parts have been already published. It was previously known as ISA 99, to whomever wants to look for it. And the SAE J3061, which is actually more or less the automotive equivalent of 326.202, which is currently being worked on together with ISO in order to provide a much enhanced standard, which would probably be more closely related to 326.202. The third type of standards is aviation standards, not necessarily cyber ones. Of course, the A-Ring series 664 for airborne networks, 811 for airborne operations, information security, and many more. The safety documents, ARP 4754 and 4761 for design and safety analysis, and of course, the iconic DO-178 software development set. The contents of the set, now that we've gone beyond its environment, the top level big picture document is ED201. It exists only in Europe. It's a top level framework guidance of aeronautical information system security. It wasn't the first of the set, and it does not have very clear to-do lists like the rest of the lot. So it's just a strategy document. The documents that yield their names to the set, DO326 and ED202, currently at revision A. The title says a lot: Airworthiness Security Process Specification. The original set The original documents were published in 2010, the current revision since 2014. Its closest companion that completes it and details what 326.202 writes. The two companions are 356 in the United States and 203 in Europe, currently at revision A. Airworthiness security methods and considerations, very similar to the name of the DO 178 standard, and incidentally, 356 is exactly twice 178, probably a coincidence. This set is currently at revision A that was published just a few months ago, 2018, which made this entire set a complete and workable set. And that's the reason why the pace of events got a lot quicker now. The next one is DO 355 ED 204, Information Security Guidance for Continuing Airworthiness. That's the in-service standard. And this one is already in quite broad use, even more than the other documents. The last one in the set currently is not yet published. It's about to be published in 2019, later in this year, only in Europe, because in the United States, the FAA does these things by itself, so the government doesn't regulate itself. Process standard for security certification or declaration of air traffic management, air navigation systems, ground systems. How do they relate to each other, more or less? Let's look at it real quick on a graphic chart. 202 and 326 are the what of the process. 203, 356 are the how. Both comprise the core of process and methodology. Add to it 205 that does have some in-service aspects, but it's mainly a development document, and you get the development core of the set. 355, 204 is the after development, post-development, in-service part of the set. 201 just hovers above the lot and is a strategic document. And there are two European documents, 13, glossary, 17, the references. Now, what are FAA and EASA doing right now? They're adopting, in a gradual multi-year process, they're adopting the DO 326 ED 202 set formally. How do they do that? The FAA already recognized the DO 326, 355, 356 as acceptable means of compliance, meaning ignore them at your peril. Also, there's a large process of amending parts 23, 25, 27, 29, 33, 35, which means all sorts, all types, all sizes of aircraft, rotorcraft, engines, propellers, and it also suggested explicit laws, rules, and regulation changes even at Congress legislation, which means it's going to become law of the land quite soon. Two interesting other processes at FAA are: one, assessment of cybersecurity for commercial off-the-shelf and previously certified products. And the other one is review of existing airborne communication, navigation, and surveillance, air traffic management, existing TSOs and standards for cybersecurity. Results should be interesting. EASA is performing an across-the-board effort with two rulemaking tasks teams. The first of them is currently amending CS25, which is the parallel of the American Part 25 for large commercial transport aircraft. Then it would proceed to 23, 29, 27 engines, propellers, again, the parallel of what the Americans are doing. This is a 2-3 year effort, but it's on its way. And They've clearly stated that they base this effort on ED202A and ED203A, which are the equivalents of DO326A and DO356A. The other task force is dealing with organizations of cybersecurity risk management for all aviation domains: design, production, maintenance, everything, aircrew, ATM/ANS, airports, and they are harmonized with EuroK, which authors the ED documents. So it's going to be very related to this set of documents. Okay, what regulation is already in place in the United States? First and foremost is the policy statement 2116-02, currently at revision 2, which allows establishing of special conditions for aircraft systems for cybersecurity. Currently, it's already for all aircraft types, engines, propellers, etc. The original document is from policy is from 2014. Currently, it's more inclusive. Unofficially, the FAA did it starting 2005, starting with the Dreamliner, Boeing 787. 3 advisory circulars that are already touching the 326, the American version of the set, are 119-1 for Aircraft Network Security Program. And this one already uses 355, DO355, which is part of the set and heavily relies on DO326 as its baseline. Advisory Circular, Revision C of Advisory Circular 2140 for data link communication systems supporting air traffic services that uses the entire DO326 set as its reference. And Revision D of Advisory Circular 120-76 for EFBs, electronic flight bags, that includes a brand new security procedures section. And up to now, it only uses the references of DO326 set, but one may expect that in the next revision, probably revision E, 326 would be a more convenient way to state whatever is stated there right now. What next? RTCA and EuroK are working on the next round of amendments. The first one scheduled for 2020 is a revised ED201A top-level strategy document. The RTCA, the Americans, are still pondering whether to join or not. A revised revision A of ED204 and DO355, the in-service guidance. It's not going to change the mentality of the document, just some corrections, some clarifications, probably something like 2 new appendices to give some more examples of some complicated cases, and probably some pointers to the brand new security event management, ED and DO document, scheduled for 2021. And then in 2022, it would probably be wrapped up with cleaned glossary and references documents. And then the next round of changes will probably start, but we don't know about that yet. Okay, we've talked around and above the 326-202 set. Now let's look at the process that is in the core of this document set, the Airworthiness Security Process, or OSP. It includes 7 distinct steps. These steps are later broken into 14 activities that include 62 objectives. Check that. DO178 includes a maximum of 71 objectives. So this is a heavy-duty standard. The first one, as usual, is the plan. Plan for security aspects of certification. In order to not repeat this long name, I would just call it from now on Psychic. You submit the plan. Then you establish your security scope of the element under certification, be it an aircraft, a system, a group of systems, an item, whatever. Having established the security scope, you go on to the security risk assessment. The security risk assessment needs to assess something. This something is the security architecture that includes the security measures. If you have none, just guess or just put into the process an architecture that has no security measures to begin with. Then we start with the assessment, and then we get to what we would call the decision. Is the security risk that was assessed acceptable or not? In the unlikely case that it's acceptable, if the answer is yes, you just submit the psychic summary and you're done. You submit it, of course, to the authorized certification authority. In the more likely case where the risk is not acceptable, you go ahead and we have two steps done in parallel. The security development itself and the integral process of effectiveness assurance, which would yield a new security architecture, or the first security architecture if it's the first pass through the loop. Then you assess it again. You assess it again. Is it acceptable? If your first pass was so good that you made it acceptable, you're done, of course. If not, you reiterate it until you're done. The decision is based on an acceptability matrix. That's a compact way of putting in the criteria for decision. We'll see that very soon. Now let's look a little deeper into these various 7 steps. The first one, the psychic, plan for security aspects of certification before the process starts, is actually the 6th plan on top of the 5 key plans of DO 178-254. So this is one of your first signals that 326 ED202 is very closely related to the existing safety development procedures existing at the FAA and, of course, at EASA. The psychic summary at the end is not a plan. It's more like the equivalent of the achievement summary at the end of DO 178-254. It's not a plan, it's just a plan summary. Now, steps 2 and 3, establishing the security scope and performing the risk assessment. That's an iterative process. We start with aircraft security scope definition. We break it down to system security scope definition. This is not necessarily iterative unless you found some heavy-duty changes you need to perform after you've done the risk assessment. The assessment starts with preliminary aircraft security risk assessment. Then it's broken down to preliminary system security risk assessment. Then, if it's not acceptable at first sight, you go ahead and implement the security architecture and measures. Following the implementation, we go bottom up. First, we assess risk assessment for system security. Then we close the loop at the aircraft level. If it's acceptable this time over, we're done. If it's not acceptable, we repeat the process. A little deeper look into the risk assessment that feeds from the security scope, failure conditions and severity from the safety analysis we should have done before, some preliminary architecture or the architecture from the previous iteration that yields the security measure characterization. And then we have 3 major components and artifacts in the process. We should develop a list of threat conditions, a catalog of threat scenarios, and a dossier of preliminary vulnerabilities. Why preliminary? Because the complete vulnerability dossier would only be done after testing and verification at the end of the process. Now, the entire process is security risks, which are fed into our risk acceptability matrix I promised you 2 minutes ago. This is a binary decision. The result is either yes or no, acceptable, not acceptable. It's very similar to the safety acceptability matrix. Slight changes in the terms. On the horizontal scale, we have the severity of the threat condition effect. In safety world, it would be safety severity effects. On the vertical scale, we have the level of threat. In safety land, it would be probability. For severity, we start with no safety effect at all. We end with catastrophic, losing the aircraft, multiple fatalities. You don't want to know about it. With the level of threat, we go from extremely low, where you need the resources of a superpower and a lot of time and heavy machinery to hack the system, until we reach the very high level of threat, in which your grandmother can do it at ease. Two examples to just depict what we're talking about. In the first one, the threat condition is the loss of aircraft control function. That's catastrophic because that would do away with the airplane. The threat scenario, by the way, these examples are very basic, almost theoretic examples, so don't take them very, very specifically. The hacker here starts with the in-flight entertainment system. That's probably the only way in the air to get into anything. Hacks into the server of the onboard network, then reaches the flight control system. This requires real expertise and pro tools. The probability, it doesn't need a superpower, but the probability is low, not extremely low, but low. Still, because it's catastrophic, the result is it's not acceptable. Go do something about it. Second example, the threat condition is a degradation of the maintenance system. It's not nothing, because the maintenance system on board can be very annoying if it breaks down or degraded. So it's not nothing, but it's minor. The threat scenario, direct access, because these are usually commercial technology, Microsoft-driven type of computers. But it does require some average skill and basic software. You have to go past some probably built-in passwords or something like that. So the level of threat is not very high, but it's high. If we go back, high and minor is acceptable. If you want, you can ignore it. Maybe you don't want, but you don't need to. Okay. When our risk is not acceptable, then we go into the security development process. Within this process, we have embedded the verification or part of the assurance process. We start with aircraft security architecture and measures, top down. Break it down to system security architecture and measures. Then we close the loop at the system level with system security verification. Then we close the larger loop at aircraft security verification. And there could be a few iterations here, and there could be a few iterations at the aircraft level. At the end of the day, when we're done, we can go ahead and submit a system security integrator guidance for systems. This would usually be used by maintenance organizations and operating organizations, and aircraft security operator guidance, usually for large operators such as airlines, etc. Now, one important point to emphasize is that 326.202 do not tell you what solutions to pick. They do not mandate any solutions. They may give examples, they may direct, they may point to credible references, but they would not mandate solutions. Rather, they would tell you which process to use for that. Well, in this process, some principles are pointed out and are recommended. And it goes top down from the aircraft level to the system or multi-system level down to the item level. And I'm not going to go over each one of them separately, but it starts with the very top level principle of defense in depth, which means that every level, the aircraft level, system level, every system, every item, should defend themselves somehow and not rely on any other layer of defense by the aircraft, system, or item, although they are there because the other levels implement the same principle. And we go down through the system level, down the item level, where we have some very specific principles such as control access to any connections, to every connection. The list privilege principle, which means that you do not allocate any privileges that are not absolutely necessary, only the most necessary privileges, and so on and so forth. Okay, security assurance is an integral process, and it does not look very well. It's not very visible inside the process, in the steps of the process, but it comprises a huge part of the process. So we should check that very closely. Mainly in 356 and 203, we have the security assurance process very much detailed. It includes two types of processes: security-specific assurance that you would not find for safety or any other functional area, and security development assurance that's quite similar to any other type of development, such as safety, etc. The assurance activities are comprise 13 different sections that include 39 objectives broken down into 118 activities. Remind you again, DO 178 includes 71 objectives. It's a huge undertaking. If we look at the security-specific assurance, we have security risk assessment, vulnerability identification, security refutation, which is a security-specific type of validation, security deployment, post-development, and continued security effectiveness, taking care, actually planning ahead of how security would be taken care of after delivery. And in the development assurance, you get all the usual tasks: security requirements, security design, security implementation, much like safety requirements, safety design, safety implementation. Which brings us to the two major ways of making this process, the assurance of the process, more efficient. The first one is for non-security specific assurance activities, using your credits from the hopefully already existing regular safety development assurance practices 4754 and DO 178, which could save you up to a quarter of the entire security assurance activities, and 25% is quite a saving. The other method to reduce the effort is to use security assurance level, which is quite the parallel of IDEL and FDEL from the safety world, which if we have cell 3 for the highest security assurance, which provides the highest defense capability available under 326.202, And for cell 3, we would have to perform the entire security assurance process. And it gradually goes down to cell 0, which is the lowest security assurance that has no defensive role. So why on earth would we need such a security assurance level? The answer is that we have to have it for assets that have no defensive capability at all if they cannot defend themselves, and we need to provide them some external security measures. Assets like control of the aircraft, etc., that maybe cannot defend themselves. Here, the effort is not zero, it's just very low. You just need to prove that you do no harm. Okay, we've developed everything. Now we're ready to go. Not so fast. We may still have modifications. What types of modifications? The usual. Installing new aircraft systems or networks, replacing existing systems or networks, modifying existing systems or networks, and the worst, removing systems or networks. Why is this the worst? Just think of the prospects of removing an LRU, including the firewall you relied on to protect something. And I'll let your imagination take you from there. 326.202 regards the modification process as a development process, just like development from scratch, with a few tweaks. It's a miniature development process, probably not a full scale, unless you turn the aircraft heads down. But it does include some waivers, such as reduced effort if low overall aircraft security, if there's a low overall aircraft security impact, maybe there's no overall aircraft security impact, and then you can do the process only for the system you're changing, you're modifying. There are also some additional efforts, such as change impact analysis, that you need to provide in order to show or to demonstrate that you actually do not impact what you say you don't impact. Okay, but even if you do nothing, if you just let the aircraft be and do not modify it, time is not a friend, because even after you delivered the system or the airplane, and here the green line of a real case of a router from an automotive system, here is where system was frozen, and a year later, the number of vulnerabilities caused by new threats detected in the outside world increased by 50%. And that, when you developed it, in the 5 years of development, during the 5 years of development, during the five years of development, the number of vulnerabilities increased from around 100 to around 400, which is a 300% increase. Which means you can run, but you cannot hide. So the 202326 set has a very big footnote talking about it. The process remains applicable during the whole aircraft lifetime, including modifications to the type design. Okay, that's fair, you caused that. But also new threat scenarios, new vulnerabilities, and modifications to the security environment, even new people introduced or new roles for people introduced can influence this. So this may also trigger updates in the security guidance and instructions for continued airworthiness, which means that you need to keep an ongoing process even after you delivered a complete product and you believe that you have nothing to improve it with. Tough luck. Now we're getting closer to the in-service document, but first let's look at an illustrative depiction of what it is. We have the airplane in service with instructions for continued airworthiness derived from ARP 5150 or 5151. We have ground support information systems, which, let's be very optimistic, were developed according to some very good industry standard guidance, such as ISO 27000 as far as security is concerned, but there's a gap. These industry standard guidance do not really know how to deal with airborne security, and instructions for continued airworthiness didn't know how to deal with regular industry standard guidances. So DO 355 and ED 204 provide us the aircraft information security guidance, bridging the gap. What does it include? It includes 11 subjects of guidance in 5 areas. For the aircraft, it deals with airborne software handling, aircraft components handling, aircraft network access points handling. For ground systems, it deals with GSE, sorry, and with ground support information systems, which is any other ground information system that's not GSE. There's generic InfoSec guidance as well for digital certificates that specifically have to do with aviation, and aircraft information security incident management, which is going to be very much enhanced into the new DO and ED document, as we've seen earlier. In the organizational area, we have Operator Aircraft Information Security Program and Operator Organization Risk Management for the organization of the operator. Now, for the personnel aspects of the operator, we have 2 types of guidances: roles and responsibilities and personnel training. It does deal with training. And as I mentioned earlier, 355-204 is already the document that's the most widely used set as of now. Okay, this much for describing the set. But before we conclude, I would like to leave you with 5 takeaways from the 326-202 set, not necessarily directly related to what we discussed, but not detached from it. First is security is its own discipline, in the sense that it needs unique expertise, requires its own analysis techniques and assurance considerations. It's not a safety afterthought or any afterthought of any other aspect. Do not just treat it as an afterthought. That's a good tip. Don't ignore it. Integration with safety. Do you want to integrate security with safety very tightly, or do you want to keep them modular? The answer is not clear. It depends. It relies very heavily on your specific program, project, and organization factors, and the answer would be different per case. So consider this very carefully and don't rush to any conclusions up front. There's more than one AMC, more than one acceptable means of compliance. This does not mean that there is more than one 326-202. There's only one. But 326-202 include a variety of examples of means of compliance, of suggestions, etc., because they recognize that security methodologies are still evolving. So they allow you some breathing room, but it also poses on you some extra responsibility compared to existing safety standards that you may already know. So you'll have to make some decisions here. It's not automatic. The fourth one, airworthiness information security, is still, quote, from the set, work in progress. 326-202 states that clearly, because measures, techniques, standards, even methodologies are still evolving. So whatever you do, whatever you develop, keep in mind that it would 100% change. So don't set in stone anything if you can avoid it. And the last take is that OSP, Airworthiness Security Process, is very similar in nature to the safety process. So both processes have more or less the same logic, so they can benefit from each other. Okay, if you want to get more later this month, there will be a white paper available on the Afusion site. You can come and attend us on March 12th in Munich for 1 day of training on this. You can schedule yourselves a private session if you like, or you can just email us, ask whatever you want to ask. And with that, I will leave you with famous last words of Technology VP of Malwarebytes, one of the most prominent anti-malware companies. If you're not paranoid, you're not going to survive. Vince?
Very good, Aaron, that was fantastic. I really, really appreciate the very good, full discourse on ED 202, DO 326A, and now time for some questions. Looks like we've got some good questions, folks. Thanks for asking those. Aaron, why don't you take this first one? Is there any difference between DO 356 and ED 203? And I think it looks like the question is repeated. So are there any differences between the
Okay,
American
good, great question. Great question. Did you tell them to ask it, Vance?
No, I actually didn't.
Well,
truly.
Just in very, very short, it relates to the very interesting history of how these standards were made, which we decided to not include in order to give you more technical time. In 2014, the original 2 and 326 were split. They used to be an all-in-one document, and they were split into a top level 326-202 and other companion documents that started emerging. But 203 and 356, the originals, were not identical. The originals. The Europeans had one opinion, the Americans had another opinion. I won't go deeper into this. But then they embarked on an effort of about 2-3 years, and the revision A is technically identical. They are exactly the same, except for some, I would say, formalities. The technical contents of 356A and 203A is identical. This was not the case with 356 and 203 before revision A. Was that clear enough?
Very good. That's a great answer. Thanks, Aaron. Here's another question. Is DO 326 the more important of the documents? So I guess that applies to 202. So our
326 and 202 are technically the same. 356 and 203 are exactly the same. So we can talk about 326, 356, and 202, 203. It's the same discussion. So what is the question? Which is the more important?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. The short answer is yes. Both of them are the most important. But
okay.
No, really, that was a sarcastic answer. 203, 356 are complementing 202, 326. One can even regard 202 and 203 on one hand, and 326 and 356 on the other hand, regard them as one document with two parts. 202 and 203, 326 and 356 are actually one. You can regard them as part A, part B, whatever. It's unwise and unpractical to separate them. Both of them are the core of the set. And if you're talking in service, then 326, 356, and 355 are one document with parts A, B, and C. There's no
Very good.
more important
Very well
and less
said.
important here.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Another question, Aaron. We have ED 205 standalone. It doesn't appear that there's a RTCA American counterpart. What's your opinion on that? And we know that ED stands for European Document, DO stands for just document, typically North American. Why don't the Americans have a corollary to ED 205, Aaron?
Well, I touched that briefly. It's probably because the FAA doesn't feel it's necessary to regulate an activity that's in the United States, mostly government activity. Air navigation services in the United States are government. In Europe, there are a few providers. So in order to decrease chaos over there, the Europeans probably felt the need for a standard document. In the United States, the FAA has internal norms, regulations, documents, and when it comes to cooperation between the Americans and the Europeans, NextGen in the United States and CESAR in Europe are closely coordinated. They have coordination committees, etc., etc. But within the scope of the United States, probably it was not deemed necessary because the NextGen project probably believes they can take care of themselves without any mandatory external regulation. This is my speculation. This is not an official opinion.
I agree with you. That's a good answer. Aaron, another question we have is, with DO 160 environmental testing, we can perform the environmental test after the system's done. Can we do any kind of cybersecurity testing to show compliance to the DO 326 document set after the system's done? Is there any equivalent, or do we really need, apparently I'm reading this into the question, do we also really need that process upfront during development and continuous background?
Well, 326, 356, and again, when I say, by the way, make it simple. When I say 326, 356, I mean also 202, 203, so excuse me for not elaborating. 326, 356 defines the process, let me remind you, that goes on into service. Actually, if you look very deep into 355 and even go upstairs to ED 201, they define the process down to decommissioning of the airplane. It does not stop at delivery of the airplane to the operator. So in there, inside 326, 356, 355, all of those, you would already have, maybe it's not complete, maybe there would be future revisions, but you already have the logic that provides for what you were asking for, the post-delivery testing. It's in there. It's in there somehow in the details, in the fine details, which are like 3 levels below what we can touch today in 1 hour.
Fantastic. It's a great answer. Well, folks, we've come to the end of our time, and it's time to say goodbye. So thanks very much to my colleague, David, for his great expertise and knowledge on aviation cybersecurity. And thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, and this evening. Maybe we'll see you in Munich.
Vance, thank you for staying up until 2 a.m. in Australia.
Who knows where I am, actually?
I know.
That's part of the cybersecurity ecosystem.
Okay.
Very good. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Bye-bye.